Well, welcome to a new series of Devo videos that we're going to be offering for you over the next couple of months. We're diving into a topic that you probably don't stop and think about very often. We are going to look at some obscure characters in the Bible. Now, we can rattle off a bunch of the big name characters and you're going to know those, whether that's the New Testament characters like obviously Jesus, but maybe Paul or Peter or John or one of the disciples, or even like Mary or Mary Magdalene or somebody like that who's a pretty prominent character, or the Old Testament, one of the patriarchs like Abraham or Isaac or you know their offspring, or Moses or David, or on and on. We could dive into one of the big name prophets, but instead, what we're going to do over these next series of videos, over the next several weeks, is look at some characters that are pretty obscure, meaning they're only mentioned a time or two in the Bible, but yet in the midst of their brief cameo, they offer us a very important lesson. I'm going to start this off today by jumping into the book of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel tells really the story of David. We read about David in 1 Samuel, but 2 Samuel is where his reign starts. At the end of 1 Samuel, King Saul is killed, and then the first couple chapters of 2 Samuel is David kind of getting everything in place to become king. And we read about chapters 5 and 6, really where he actually becomes king of all Israel. Israel, Judah, all of it. And in chapter 6, we see that he has gone in and he has established his new home in Jerusalem, and he's trying to get everything moving forward the way that he thinks that he should do in the eyes of God. And in chapter 6, they bring the Ark of the Covenant with them into Jerusalem. And there's a very important story that takes place, and it involves a man by the name of Uzzah. Now, Uzzah is somebody who made a small mistake and I think was trying to correct this mistake and was struck down. Starting in 2 Samuel chapter 6, it says, David again brought together out of Israel chosen men, 30,000 in all. He and all his men set out from Baalah of Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim that are now on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and the whole house of Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with songs, with harps, lyres, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died right there before the ark. Now, if you're just reading this story and you're not diving into this, you can read this and think, man, what in the world, God? Like Uzzah was trying to protect this ark, and it was going to fall, and he wanted to make sure that it didn't fall, and so he just reached up and grabbed a hold of it to steady it, and then boom, you just struck him down. And it's easy to read that story if you're just kind of flipping through the pages of Scripture, or to hear that story and think that God is cruel. Think that God is a God who just only cares about himself and doesn't care about us. I kind of mentioned this in a sermon a couple of weeks ago, talking about sin, that God can seem harsh at times. But we forget that God is holy and that we're not. We're flawed and we're imperfect. And you might think, well, that's even more reason for God to have grace on us. Even more reason for God to extend his mercy to us, because after all, it was Adam and Eve who sinned and caused me to be in this messed up, broken spot. But there's some details in this story that if you just read it through quickly, you might miss. You see, the first detail jumps out in chapter 6, verse 3, when Uzzah and Ahio and these men bring out the ark of God, and it says they put it on a new cart. That's a very important detail. And in particular, it's a cart that's driven by oxen. We read that detail in verse 6, where Uzzah grabs a hold of it. It says, because the oxen stumble. When you go back to the book of Exodus and to the book of Numbers, those are books of instructions. God gives many, many instructions. Before he starts giving the law in Leviticus, he gives instructions on how he is to be interacted with, how he is to be worshipped. And one of those very particular instructions had to do with this very ark, how it should be carried, how it should be handled, how it should be treated. See, this ark was considered to be a representation of God. David was bringing it into the city of Jerusalem because this was now the city of David. It was going to become the city of God, and he wanted the ark there. And in particular, the ark was to be carried by men on poles. The poles were going to go through the sides of the ark, through rings on it. They were to carry it. They were to hold it. Imagine if you had something precious and your options between transporting it between your house and somebody else's house, where you could hold it in your arms or put it in a box in a safe place in the seat of your truck, or you could just throw it in the bed of your truck. It's going to get there either way, but it's more likely to be protected in the front seat of your truck. That's a good way to hold on to it. They put this on a cart driven by oxen. And so the ark was not properly taken care of. It was not properly handled. And as a result, it was going to start to fall. And I don't know, maybe it would have fallen to the ground, maybe not. The oxen stumbled. Uzzah thought that he was doing the right thing. But in reality, the whole issue they have here started when they disobeyed. They didn't do what God had told them to do. They thought they had a better plan. And my goodness, does that not sound familiar to us today? How many of us ignore what it is God has told us because we think that we have a better plan? Maybe that's in marriage. Maybe that's in how we define sexuality. Maybe that's in how we handle our finances. My goodness, I'll look in the mirror here and say, maybe that's how we run the church. We think we have a better plan than God. Or else we just think that we don't need to pay that much attention because maybe His plan is old and antiquated and, we're in the modern world. We're in 2022 now. But when I read this story and when I look at how God struck Uzzah down, yes, it does seem harsh and it does seem to be, like a quick reaction that God didn't have to take. We have to understand that if we follow the way God has laid out in front of us to follow, and we learn the lesson of Uzzah here, but the lesson by not doing what he did, or doing what he didn't do in particular, that God can bless us. Because the ark winds up going to somebody else's house. It goes to the house of someone named Obed-Edom, the Gittite. And Obed-Edom is blessed by God because he holds the ark and he stores it and he handles it properly. And David could have missed out on that. See, too often we're quick to see what's going on around us. We make our own plan and we get stuck with what comes. Now compare this story to one we read in the New Testament, a very famous story where Jesus is in a boat and the storm comes. And Jesus doesn't get out and try to, steady the boat. That's what the disciples are trying to do. They're panicking. They're freaking out because the boat might sink. He doesn't get out and try to steady the boat. He doesn't grab the oars and say, let me row. No, what's he do? He walks out and says, calm down. And the storm calms down. When we find ourselves in a time, let me just set it up this way. We're going to find ourselves in times where we are caught in that storm of life. We're caught because our cart is bouncing around on a bumpy road. We're going to find those times. What are we going to do in those moments? Are we going to call on God, or are we going to try to fix it ourselves? Are we going to be like Uzzah and try to take care of it ourselves, or are we going to copy Jesus in that storm and call out to God in those moments? My hope is we learn from Uzzah, that we don't get ourselves off track because we've disobeyed God from the very beginning. We're going to disobey God. We're sinful humans, but we're also redeemed humans who have an access to God, and we need to remember that and take advantage of that. God hears us when we call out for His name. So if you catch yourself in those moments, don't hesitate. Call out to Him. Seek His wisdom. Seek His direction so that in all that we do it the way He's laid out for us, not the way that we think might be the best path.